Well, welcome back to First in Preparedness. Today we have something very special for you. We are here inside the secret First in Preparedness guest bungalow. Why? I don't know. Looks a bit more campy if you ask me. It's got wood everywhere. But what we're going to touch on today is a subject of camp stoves and how it applies to your own preparedness strategy. Well, I guess you could say I have a slight obsession with camp stoves. In fact, I still have the first stove that I purchased for hiking back when I was a teenager. And believe it or not, it still does work to this day. The other thing that I wanted to point out was this. This is a simple Coleman 2-burner propane stove. I purchased this in 1992, right before I went on a trip to Yosemite. And guess what? This same stove went out on 7 different camp outings last year and competed in a chili cook-off in December. To say the least, I guess there's some truth to they don't make them how they used to. Before I get off too far into the weeds, there is a wide variance in how camp stoves operate, and we're going to cover some of those today. There are many different types of camp stoves, and also what types of fuel do they burn. Now let's revisit some of my lack of PowerPoint skills. There are 5 different types of camp stoves that are defined by the types of fuel that they use. Those being alcohol, propane and butane, white gas or liquid fuel, wood or twig stoves, and lastly solid fuel. Now, let's look at each of these stoves because each of them have their pros and cons. Let's take a quick glance at alcohol stoves. Alcohol stoves were made popular by the Swedish company Trangia back in the 1950s, and today there are several variants or several companies manufacturing these alcohol stoves. Heck, you can pretty much look up how to build an alcohol stove out of a tin can. It's very, very easy, and there's instructions all over the interwebs. Now, some of the pros of an alcohol stove are they have readily available fuel, and theoretically this could be manufactured if shit hit the fan by distilling alcohol. Now for the cons. The small problem with these stoves is they do require a large volume of fuel. The next thing is they do not put out the most heat and in fact have a pretty low BTU in comparison to like a propane or a butane or something like that. Next, let's look at propane and butane stoves. Of course, there are tons of stove manufacturers of these types of products. They range in size from micro burners to the size of industrial kitchens. Some of the advantages of these types of stoves are they put out a lot of heat. They have a very high BTU. And of course, they come in a variety of sizes, everything from 2-burner camp stoves down to micro size. Now, the cons of these stoves are this fuel may not be available if stuff were to go sideways or we were to get into a shituation. And of course, there's a finite supply of fuel when that happens. Next, let's look at white gas or liquid fuel stoves. Of course, many of the manufacturers of propane stoves do produce liquid fuel stoves, and some examples of this would be Coleman, Whisperlite, and MSR. Now, some of the advantages of these types of stoves are they can utilize a variety of fuel. In fact, many employ a dual fuel system that can utilize either white gas, camp gas, or even unleaded fuel. So, if shit hit the fan, I guess you can always siphon gas. Now, the other advantage is they also put out a high BTU, or in other words, they burn real hot, and they also perform better at higher elevations than propane or butane. Now, let's explore some of the cons. Once again, if we get into a shituation, thanks for that by the way, not a Rubicon, or shit hits the fan, there's going to be a finite supply of this type of fuel. If there is a global catastrophe, it also requires advanced refining technology. Now, let's move on to the wood burning or twig type stove. In the span of my camping career, these are a relatively new thing in my book. So let's look at the advantages of these stoves. Well, the pro is obvious. Somewhat infinite fuel. I mean, really, you can find twigs and wood just about laying everywhere where there is trees, except in streaming metropolises. Now let's look at the downside. These are difficult to use in moist environments or if it's raining. and basically you need to be proficient at starting a fire if you want to use them, which sometimes may not be tactically advisable. Despite the fact there are some interesting technology advances that have been made with these stoves. There is the typical open flame burning stove, such as the Vargo or firebox style, and now there is something known as the gasification stove. These are in essence almost an afterburner in which heated gases from the wood are reignited through ports in the top. These actually burn very efficiently and hot. However, there is a downside to them. They cannot be packed down very small like a Vargo or a Lixada or one of these open burning stoves. Lastly, let's look at solid fuel stoves. These are also known as Esbit stoves and were issued to German soldiers in World War II. They are also known as trioxane stoves. Now, there is one distinct advantage of these stoves. They can be tiny. They are also commonly known as pocket stoves. There is one big drawback, however. They stink to high heaven. So if you're in a tactical situation, anyone will be able to smell you a mile away. And another disadvantage is they are not quite as efficient and have relatively low output of BTU. Let us finally break down the situations and strategies in which we would employ each of these stoves. If I was in a shituation where I was bugging in or possibly leaving in a vehicle, I would go with one of these three stoves. This one being a propane model. Obviously, in a house, if you have natural gas, you can hook it directly up to that. Or I also have a dual fuel version of this stove that utilizes either white gas or unleaded gasoline. In terms of a wood burning stove, once again getting back to twigs are almost available everywhere, I would probably go with one of these gasification type of stoves. They can basically burn wood and I have almost an endless supply of fuel. Same thing goes with this open top small grill. This was an interesting item that I found. It's not only a charcoal starter, but it can also be used as a twig stove with a grill on top. Now, if I was hiking, I would probably just simply go with one of these small propane or butane mixed stoves. Reason being is they're lightweight, they are extremely efficient, and these would also work for like a modern Minuteman rucksack. Now, if I was in a situation where I had to leave with just the clothes on my back and a bug out bag, I would probably opt for one of these three twig stoves or wood burning stoves and maybe throw in one of these alcohol burning Trangias. Reason being is all of these wood twig burning stoves fold completely flat. They are also extremely lightweight. This one is made out of titanium. I've got quite a few of these. They do work okay, but once again, getting back to that endless fuel supply of twigs and wood, these are not a bad option if you're on foot and trying to get out of Dodge. Now, if I'm going extremely lightweight and small, like say for an assaulter's pack, I would probably go with one of these Esbit stoves. They fold up extremely small, they don't take a lot of space, they aren't the most efficient, but they do serve their purpose. Another convenient thing is you can fit 4 fuel tablets inside the stove itself. Folds up nice and neat, very small, fits in a very small space. As you can see, each of these stoves serve a slightly different purpose in terms of a preparedness strategy. Now, one other helpful item that I found is if you have one of these micro butane propane stoves, are these handy little adapters. These will basically make one of these fit on a typical propane canister like this. I hope you found this somewhat informative. If you have your own ideas, feel free to leave a comment and anything that I may or may not have missed. Once again, thank you for tuning in to First in Preparedness. And as always, if you're enjoying the content, like and subscribe, and always hit the bell if you want to be notified of new content that we upload.